Welcome to the Black Sheep of the Battle Network series. Battle Network 4 is widely considered to be the worst in the series, and for good reason. Battle Network 4 is also the first in the series to truly embrace the two versions format. These games have multiple differences between them, including 6 navies exclusive to each game. So I'll be picking just one version to do as my main playthrough. In this case I'll be picking Blue Moon, and I'll add the relevant parts from Red Sun where appropriate. So, let's get started. Now, you may notice that the visuals look a bit different. I don't remember exactly why they did this, but this is the visual style they keep for the rest of the series. And don't pay any mind to how AC/DC Town looks totally different, they just tore down and rebuilt the entire town in the time between Battle Network 3 and Battle Network 4. Going against the formula of previous games, this game is centered around tournaments. 3 separate tournaments that you will compete in throughout the game. In each you will face 3 opponents, which are chosen randomly out of a pool of 6 potential opponents. Yes, you heard that right. Randomly. Each opponent will have some small mini-story with them that replaces the interesting content that you'd normally expect here. You know, stuff like a story or unique dungeon. None of that nonsense in this game. Most of these mini-stories will have your opponent either need your help or your opponent will commit a crime and then you'll resolve the issue, fail to report any of the crimes to the people running the tournament, and then you fight. Whatever your task is, you can be certain it'll be tedious, monotonous, and entirely pointless. I think that was actually the slogan for this game. Oh, but don't worry, at least the characters you'll meet are completely unremarkable and will be forgotten as soon as they arrive. So, look forward to that. So I'd be remiss to mention that the first boss fight in this game, Shade Man, is unbeatable. You just have to survive for a few turns and then a cutscene triggers. But that didn't stop them from making you go through an annoying dungeon first, a dungeon which is one of 3 unique dungeons in this game. Yeah, this dungeon is a pain in the ass. It makes you find these bats running around to open doors. You have to catch 3 in the first area and then 4 in the second area. And to catch them, you have to activate this sonar thing, which is only active for 10 seconds. You know, just to make it a little bit more annoying. Now, I mentioned how each opponent has their own mini-story, and to get a feel for what these quests you get to go through for each part of the tournament entail, my first opponent was this dude. Unique sprite and all. But not a unique Navi. No, he has one of the 2 generic Navis this game has. His quest involves him scaring off some Mafia dudes by jumping off a rooftop. No, I'm not exaggerating. Then, said Mafia guys take the fight back to him, and yada yada yada, I have to fight a dozen generic Navis. This is the kind of tedium this game brings. The first unique Navi I was paired with was Aquaman. Honestly, I found this guy to be hilariously easy. His main attacks are a simple buster shot and a simple bomb attack. You can practically avoid them with your eyes closed. Later in the fight, he'll spawn these hydro cannons. They're static and have very obvious tells to them, so they're not a real threat. Chip setup is pretty easy. Run any electric element chips you can find. If you're on your first run, your selection is pretty pitiful, and if Aquaman were a real threat on your first run, that could be a problem. But some simple grinding for boomer and wide shot chips should give you the damage output necessary to take him down. Now in Red Sun, my first unique Navi was veteran to the series, Gutsman. Yep, they made Gutsman a version exclusive. Gutsman's MO has changed significantly since the last game, but he is not any more difficult because of it. He now spams a basic buster attack that is almost trivial to dodge. His ground pound now breaks one random panel on your side of the field and causes a set of rocks to fall from the sky. This is actually easier to avoid than his previous ground pound, you know, the one that effectively lets you block all his attacks, and he'll punch you if you're close enough. His patterns may have changed, but he's still slow and predictable, so I doubt you'll have much trouble with him. Another big change this game brings is the double soul mechanic. Gone are the days of style changes. Now you have this. The double soul is something achieved by fusing MegaMan with another Navi, essentially. It sounds far cooler than it actually is. The double souls you get are predetermined by the version you play. The 6 different Navis in each version are the 6 unique soul unisons you'll get access to. To activate double soul, you have to sacrifice a chip of the corresponding elements to fuse. Since I got the aqua soul, I can use any water element chip to grant myself what is effectively the aqua style of previous games. For 3 turns. Yeah, the dumbest part is the time limit. Each soul unison can only last 3 turns, and no, you can't unite with the same Navi multiple times per battle. This is worse than style changes in almost every conceivable way. You may also note that I said there are 6, but previously said that your opponents are chosen at random. Does that mean that you can't get all 6 in a single playthrough? Correct. Next up is Top Man, and thank fuck because the alternative is so much worse. This guy can be tricky if you happen to catch him on your first playthrough. He moves fast, and most of his attacks involve him turning into a top, during which he is invulnerable to damage. The most dangerous... is dangerous the right word here? annoying. The most annoying part of this fight is when he spawns two tops that fly in a diagonal pattern. These are significantly difficult to avoid as you have to guesstimate where they're going to go. However, this guy isn't terribly hard, at least not on your first run. Just get your timing down and you'll be fine. I forgot to go into the number trader in the last video, so let's explain what this is now. The number trader is a lotto system that will give you an item when you put in the corresponding number. It's intended that you find the numbers out in the wild and write them down, or take a picture of them. But the internet exists. With these codes, you can grab multiple late-game chips, 2 HP plus 500 programs, and the Gunsoul EX chip, also known as the best chip in the game. Grinding for HP memories is not important in this game, and this is why. You don't have to do the full 1000, actually your HP will drop pretty quickly if you do, but 1 plus 500 program boosts your HP to what would be endgame numbers in prior games. Now we move on to the second dungeon of the game. This stage is notorious for how annoying it is, though the madness-inducing soundtrack is probably a large part of that. For this stage, you have to fix the stories in 4 different toy robots to stop the robots from breaking the first law of robotics and Control-Alt-Deleting some people. What that actually entails is that you first read the passage, then you go find the missing piece or pieces of the story, put them in, rinse and repeat. The stories are all your normal kid stuff, a magical dog and monkey teaming up to take down a wizard, a vampire hunter taking down an evil vampire lord, a robot who has no emotion, so it's gifted emotion by God after its only friend dies, and so the robot becomes horrified by the crimes committed at war, so it kills itself. This game was rated E, right? The boss of this dungeon is Shademan. Again. But this time, you get to fight him for real. Just kidding, no you don't. You still can't damage him. You have to wait until you're given the Dark Swords, and then you one-shot him. Surviving damage is not that hard either. Not only are his attacks easy to dodge, but you can interrupt him at any point by hitting him with anything. So basically, it's a gimmick fight. They make you go through that entire dungeon and don't even give you a proper boss fight. So let's talk about Dark Chips. Dark Chips are super powerful chips, many of which can 1 or 2-shot most bosses. The downside is that they can turn Mega Man into Dark Mega Man, which prevents the use of Double Soul, and each use of a Dark Chip will permanently deduct 1 HP from Mega Man. Of course, you can't use Dark Chips whenever you want to. They are not chips you can actually put in your folder. Dark Chips only appear when Mega Man has taken enough damage that his emotion window changes to Fatigued. While there are obvious downsides to using them, quite frankly, if you only use them for the boss fights, the downsides are negligible. Why did I have to get this bastard? Of all the potential matchups, this guy is the worst. His stage is that he inverts your controls and makes you go find 3 videotapes in 3 areas. On top of that, he put these arrows on the ground that warp you back to the area entrance if you touch them. There are a lot of bad parts in this game, but this is one of the few that is obnoxiously bad. Video Man is one of the more challenging fights in the game so far. On the front row of each side is a line of tape that needs to be broken before you can deal any damage to Video Man himself. These lines of tape are easily broken, so not a big deal if not for the fact that they respawn every few seconds. Top that with Video Man moving around very fast, and it makes it hard to find efficient ways to deal damage. Video Man will also occasionally speed himself up, and if he's not doing that, he'll also start slowly regenerating HP. Because fuck you, that's why. This is undoubtedly one of the harder bosses in the game. Until that is, you realize the trick. See, while the tape respawns, it also breaks instantly if you happen to be standing on one of the panels it covers, and it doesn't damage you when it hits you. So, set up an area grab as your auto chip, and have another 1 or 2 in your folder just in case. Then, you stand where the tape would regenerate on his side of the field, stop it from getting in the way, and this makes the fight much easier, as Video Man's attacks aren't particularly hard to dodge, and now you can just focus on damage output. Next up is Woodman. Woodman is fairly similar to his Battle Network 1 form, with the notable difference being the near constant stream of rolling logs. Unfortunately, this adds a slight RNG factor to the fight as you can get caught in the wrong spot and be unable to avoid damage, especially when he starts launching his wood tower attacks later in the fight. But other than that, this fight is pretty easy. Woodman moves slow and gives you plenty of opportunities to deal damage. He's also weak to fire chips, which you should have a solid number of by now. As long as you don't get caught between a rock and a hard place, this fight should be over quickly. Now, in Red Sun, I was paired against Windman instead. Similarly, I found Windman to be fairly easy. The biggest threat is the constant wind, which will either pull you to the front row or push you to the back row. You'd think this would make the fight hard to manage, but not really. Only one of his attacks is made more dangerous by this, his exploding spike bombs. Everything else is easy to avoid if you're paying attention. So as long as you keep focused and stay on top of things, this fight shouldn't be too hard. And now it's time for the third tournament. This one brings us back to Netopia, and what do they do to an 11-year-old all alone in a foreign land? Well, they kidnap him and hold him hostage in a hotel. To test him. That's at least 2 crimes right there. The first opponent I got was the representative from Netfrica, the Africa of this world, because they just ran out of naming ideas, I guess. And upon traveling to Netfrica... So that's what that disclaimer was about. My first pairing in this tournament is Mr. Famous's new Navi, Kendo Man. Kendo Man is simple but tricky. He has just 3 attacks, a dash attack, a simple wide sword, and a move where he'll spawn 2 copies of himself and crowd you. It goes without saying that one is the hardest to deal with. But all in all, that's pretty easy to manage, except that he's darting around so fast that it's hard to time your attacks. For this fight, you want to focus on large AoE chips, wide shots, boomers, ad hocs, etc., anything that can hit multiple panels at once to increase your chances of hitting him. Then just focus on dodging his attacks and you'll be able to beat him in no time. And finally, we have Junkman. Junkman is more annoying than difficult. He'll constantly spam these floating pieces of garbage at you, not unlike Gospel from Battle Network 2, but unlike with Gospel, these can't be destroyed, they can only be slowed down. And because he's constantly spamming these things, it makes dealing damage to him a pain in the ass. Any chips that can be blocked will be blocked. Not only that, but he stays in the back row and moves around fairly quickly. This makes finding damage opportunities difficult. So there's 2 strategies for this fight. The first is to fill your folder with chips that go through or over objects in the field, boomers, bombs, balls, those kind of chips. The other is to use area grabs to bring yourself closer to Junkman, then spam whatever you can hit him with. Stuff like flame line, breath chips, the tornadoes, and the wood soul work here. The only downside to this approach is that it makes avoiding damage very hard. As such, it can become a battle of attrition. However, unlike Proto-Man, Searchman, spelled without the A for some reason, is actually quite difficult. Not only does this dude move around so quick that it's hard to reliably hit him, but when he does stop, he jumps in a fucking hole. Now, thankfully, his attacks aren't particularly hard to dodge. His main attack is throwing grenades at you, and once you understand the explosion patterns, it's fairly easy to play around them. His other attack is his snipe attack. This can very easily catch you off guard, but again, once you understand how it works, it's easier to manage. The most difficult part of this fight is simply dealing damage to him. Trying to hit him with straight line chips is like shooting a fish in a barrel. It's best to rely on stuff that has a large area effect and stuff he can walk into while he's moving around. Anything that can reduce the variables and increase chances of hitting him is good. Even better if it can hit him more than once. Now, it's at this point where the game's plot just gets really stupid, or whatever plot it had. After finishing the final tournament, we learned that the whole reason for this tournament was to find someone whose net navi they could shoot into space to stop an asteroid. No, I am not kidding. So, not only do they have official net battlers they could have asked, but also Lan, who has saved the world 3 times in the last 18 months, and is the son of one of the scientists on the team investigating the asteroid, but instead of either of those 2 options, they still laid all of humanity's future on a single tournament without telling anyone what its true purpose was. Think about that, there's a world where Junkman won, and, well, that's not good for anyone involved. You know what I totally forgot to mention? The Sea Slider. Probably because it's easy to forget about. So because wasting your time is the name of the game with this game, they just had to add something more to send you on a wild goose chase. Introducing the Sea Slider, an item that is required for you to access the Undernet in this game, as well as a way to access many shortcuts throughout the cyberworld. This little board requires you to find 3 parts, which you have no idea where they are. Then you have to find this guy to tell you about the Sea Slider. Then you have to find this Navi who will make it for you. You cannot go to that Navi first because they'll ignore you. You have to go to the guy to tell you about the Sea Slider before they'll actually make it for you. In total, it'll cost 9,000 zenny to afford, and it's barely useful, so much so that it's not mentioned outside the few side stories where it's required. Oh yeah, they made it required for some of the side stories. And before we get to the final few bosses of the game, let's talk about the final dungeon. For this dungeon, you have to cross these planet panels in the right order in order to open up the portal to the next section. Simple enough, a little annoying considering all this game has put you through, but in comparison, this is actually a pretty decent stage. Except for one thing. The magnetic field that randomly appears, and if you aren't able to button mash your way to escape it, it resets the stage and drops you back at the beginning of the current section. Wonderful. Laserman is simple but tricky. He moves around quickly and hits often. His attacks are mostly easy to avoid, except that is for the two most common attacks he'll use. The laser spread attack, which cracks the panel it hits and spreads to every panel next to it, and his sky laser attack, which causes rocks to fall from the sky. Thankfully, he gives you plenty of opportunities to deal damage. This fight is simply about timing. Quickfire chips and AoE chips will be your friend. Focus on timing your dodges and timing your attacks, and you should be fine. Yet again, this game has a double final boss fight. This time, the first fight is against you. Dark MegaMan is an exact copy of you. Your chips, your Navicust setup. Well, except for one thing. He won't, or more aptly can't, copy your esoteric playstyle. So instead, he just spams attack without really any rhyme or reason to it. This makes the fight predictable. Though it doesn't make the fight easy, but the simplest and most effective strategy is just to match his aggression and spam attacks back at him until one of you is dead. It's a really cool concept, but it needed better execution. And now, we get the final boss of the game, Duo. I'd say that Duo was harder than Alpha, but only because of how shitty the game is designed. This fight is the moment when all the flaws of this game come to a head. Duo does a lot of damage with each hit, and he has a wide arsenal of varying attacks. Plus, the only way to damage him is when he's not moving, and sometimes he pulls a fast one on you and doesn't stay still long enough for you to do damage. This means that this is a fight of cautious aggression. You want to get the damage in, but you need to be certain you're actually going to hit. On top of that, there's only one lane of panels on his side of the field, and where he is has no panels. Any chips that require a panel to be there are gonna be useless. The breath chips, flame lines, balls, the bombs, many of the Navi chips, all of them are useless here. On top of that, you can't even use dark chips against him. This has the makings of a fantastic strategic slugfest of a fight. But this is where we run into a problem. Because of the way they made this game, almost all of the V2 and V3 versions of the battle chips are locked behind the New Game Plus modes, which means that on your first playthrough, you only have access to the Tier 1 versions of each chip. Maybe you got lucky and got some Tier 2 chips, but you're not going to have a lot of them. On top of that, most of the best chips you have access to at the moment are useless against him, so they completely nerfed your damage output, yet they still designed him as a normal final boss, one that would expect you to have endgame chips by this point in the game. Unfortunately, this turns the fight from a slugfest into a tedious battle. The way I beat him was by spamming the Wood Soul's Twister attack and using some program advances. That's it, and it still came down to the luck of the run. Did I get the right chips at the right time? Did I get trapped behind broken panels or not? What could have been a fantastic boss fight instead feels cheap and frustrating. And if that's not the perfect descriptor for this game, so afterwards, we literally save the world with the power of friendship. The bad guy jumps to his death. This game is rated E, right? And then that's it. That's MegaMan Battle Network 4. For the first run. Yes, I've been hinting at it the entire video. Most of you have probably figured it out by now. But in case you haven't, in order to get all 6 unique soul unisons, and fight all the unique Navis, and get access to all the available battle chips, you have to play through the game not once, not twice, but 3 consecutive times. New Game Plus, New Game Plus 1. Yes, the padding is literally baked into this game's design. But wait, you might say, why 3 times? There are 6 souls. You get 3 on the first run, and then 3 on the second run, right? That's how math works. Well, you see, they pulled a little jokey joke on us, because you only get 2 souls the second playthrough. You have to do a whole third playthrough for just 1 final soul unison. Well, let's start run 2. The second worst opponent in the game, everyone. Behind Videoman, this douche nozzle is the worst opponent in the game. Like with Videoman, this guy tries to cheat, this time by locking you out of your main chip folder and forcing you to use a much weaker, unoptimized folder. Now, this is a dick move at any point in the game. But on New Game Plus, where I'm fighting much stronger versions of every virus, and I run the risk of encountering V3 versions of bosses as random encounters, this is pretty much a nightmare. If it weren't for the Buster Max mode, that is. Now, to get your folder back, you have to figure out the code using these 7 hints. That's right, you heard me. 7. You have to go across the cyber world and the real world to decipher the code. Or you could just Google it. That's the better option, which of course makes this take all of 5 seconds, but regardless, this is a demonstrably unfun part of the game. Now, of course, we don't immediately report the guy for cheating, instead we just go ahead with the fight as usual. Sparkman is actually kinda hard. He teleports around and you can't hit him while he's moving, and he doesn't stay still for long. He also spams these spike bombs at you. These things explode in a diagonal pattern. Standing parallel to them is a really easy way to avoid damage, however, it's also very easy to make a mistake with these things. He also likes to use this sneaking spark attack. This moves very quick, and while the pattern is easy to understand, its speed makes it hard to dodge. So this is a fight that requires you to be reactive. Set your folder up with quick-fire chips, stuff that fires instantaneously, and stuff that can go through objects in the field. And if any of those chips happen to be wood element, that's all the better. Keep in mind, the spike bombs can block attacks, so be careful around them. Focus on keeping yourself alive until you see an opening and strike. You will likely get one shot to actually hit, so don't think twice. His sneaking spark attack is the best time to attack as he stays still for a bit longer. This can be a bit of a dogfight, but with enough patience, you can beat him. Which I didn't do, because I died, and then my Dark Soul took over and killed him for me. I mean, a win is a win. Next up is Numberman in his first matchup since MegaMan Battle Network 1, and his battle style is basically the same from Battle Network 1, except he's faster and he does more damage. Yeah, this guy is actually kinda hard. Where do you get off learning how to battle, Higsby? His main attack is the same as his previous version. He summons 3 numbered balls and sends them in your direction. The number on them is how much damage you need to destroy them. Except in this game, they travel at you very fast, and rarely do they spawn with a number lower than 10. Because of how fast the balls move, and because of how much damage they take, it can be a bit hard to build a rhythm around it. A good strategy here is to load up your Navicust with a Charge Max program, and as many Attack 1 programs as you can fit. This way, you'll be able to quickly charge your Buster, and likely do enough damage to destroy at least one of the balls with some efficacy. Unfortunately, I didn't have that program because I was an idiot and I forgot to buy up all the programs in my first run. So my strategy was to destroy the balls if I could, but if not, I took the hit and tried to hit Numberman before he spawned more. And he spawns more pretty quickly. So for me, it was harder than it should have been. I had to use a couple Dark Recovery chips to keep myself alive, but I was able to win. In Red Sun, I was matched with another rematch from Battle Network 1, Fireman. By the way, Match planned to bomb the dome in order to win, which apparently isn't a fucking crime because he flat out admits to it in front of everyone and nothing happens to him. He's actually given the hero treatment because he helps disarm the bombs that he planted. Anyway, Fireman is a whole hell of a lot easier than Numberman. He is almost a 1-to-1 of his Battle Network 1 form. The only changes are that his firebombs are more frequent now, though they're still not an actual threat, and he has this looping flamethrower that is quite difficult to avoid, but he uses it so infrequently that it's not as big of a threat as it could have been. He mainly spams his basic flamethrower, and that's easy to manage. The only thing to be careful of is how quickly it triggers. Do not try to hit him while he's in his startup animation. It will end badly for you. Other than that, just load your folder with water element chips, which are easy to get regardless of which playthrough you're on, and spam them at him and the fight is over before it starts. One of my opponents is a ghost. Don't think about it, just moving on. The second tournament was my duplicate match in Blue Moon, so we'll move right on to my next Red Sun match, Roll. This is the only time you'll ever be able to fight Roll, by the way. Roll is fairly easy. Her biggest threat is the arrow shot, which destroys the chip you have equipped at the moment. This arrow isn't hard to dodge, but she moves around very fast, and the only time she stays still for a few seconds is when she's launching an attack, so mix these two together and taking advantage of openings becomes a little bit more risky. But once you account for that, it's not hard to manage this fight. The only other thing of note that she actually does is she'll occasionally summon viruses, and that can be annoying, but they're mostly just a distraction, and again, not that hard to manage. So the strategy is the same as many other fights. Focus on AoE chips and chips that she can walk into while moving around, and you should be done in no time. I think I repressed my memory of this stage. Burn Man is one of the worst parts of the game, though not the worst. You basically have to do the Fireman stage from Battle Network 1 again, just with a timing-based minigame to put out the fires. If you fail, they damage you, which... I mean, at least they didn't make you waste any chips. Also, thankfully, they only make you go through a few areas for this. They don't make you backtrack through the whole goddamn cyber world. Burn Man is a fight that can seem overwhelming, but once you understand the rhythm of the fight, it becomes a lot easier. There are 2 burners on each side of the field, and they'll go back and forth in opposite patterns. The way to avoid them is to simply stand in front of them in the row they're in, and they can't damage you. But they're such a constant threat that you have to prioritize managing them over the boss himself. This means you can't be aggressive. You have to focus on your back and forth with the burners and take damage opportunities when they present themselves. Unfortunately, Burn Man will be aggressive, so what you have to do is load your folder with quickfire chips, nothing thrown, nothing that has even the slightest variable to it, and prioritize water chips to get that extra damage. Focus on dancing with the burners and keep them in the front row so that when he pops up in front of you, you can hit him and go right back to dancing with the burners. Like I said, this fight can seem overwhelming, but once you understand that it's a rhythm fight, it becomes pretty easy. I forgot how many bad parts there were in this game. Anyways, this is the Proto Man stage. I have to scour the Undernet for various keys to find and save Proto Man. I'm only mentioning this because I had to get the C slider again, because of course they didn't allow it to carry over. Also, I want to point out that Undernet 6 in this game is literally a copy and paste of Undernet 2 from Battle Network 2. Next up is Proto Man, and I would love to say this is the best boss fight in the game, but he's only slightly harder than his Battle Network 1 form. He has his basic longsword and widesword attacks. He'll teleport in front of you, though not nearly as fast as he does in previous games. He has a shield that can block damage if he times it right. He's aggressive enough that straight line chips are unreliable, but he's far less aggressive than his Battle Network 2 and Battle Network 3 forms. And keep in mind, I fought him on New Game Plus. So overall, yeah, this is a pretty disappointing Proto Man fight. The best chips to use here are chips he can walk into and AoE chips. Mines, webs, wide shots are all great chips to use here. Remember when I said, at least they didn't make you waste any chips. Well, this guy is the 3rd worst opponent. For his stage, he hacks into weather satellites to cause a blizzard around the world because it's too hot for him. In order to stop the blizzard that he caused with the satellites, you have to relight 4 torches located in the satellite computers. Because that's how that works. But anyway, you have to sacrifice a chip to relight the torches. Wonderful. Next up is Cold Man. Cold Man is pretty simple. He's basically a slightly more complex form of Iceman from Battle Network 1. Cold Man stays in the back row for the most part. He'll spawn 3 ice cubes in random spots on the field and launch them at you if you get in front of them. He'll summon these clouds that can be easily destroyed with a charge shot. He'll also occasionally jump and slam down on a random panel on your side. This isn't particularly hard to manage, except he moves back and forth very fast, so he's not easy to hit. Most of the obvious chips for a fight like this, such as the ball chips and the bombs, are out of the question as they're keen to miss. You need chips that can be fired off quickly to make sure you get the hit in before he moves. Chips that can go through objects are a plus because they can go through the ice cubes. And of course, if any of those are electric element chips, that's all the better. One strategy I was employing was using an area grab and spamming the breath chips and the flame line chips, though this could be unreliable due to the ice cube spawns. By the way, this guy actually does get arrested, so at least they didn't let an international crime slide. Alright, I'm on run 3, getting that one last final soul, but of course, the game has to throw 2 of the worst parts at me back to back. Is there even a best part of this game? Probably the credits. First, and I totally forgot this existed, is a fucking stealth section. Because of course they added a stealth section. Why wouldn't they? You're stupid for thinking they wouldn't. And next is this fucking tedious timing-based minigame. This drove me freaking insane. You have to time it just right to break the boulder, and there are 3 types of boulders, each with a quicker cursor. You have to win this 3 times to advance. By the way, the person I'm fighting in this little mini game with is my next opponent. And the only reason I'm doing this is because my opponent says I have to prove myself to her first. So Lane could just refuse to do this and the opponent either forfeits or we just battle like normal fucking people. In fact, he could have done that for 90% of his matches. Almost every single part of this game could have been skipped if Lan had just said no. And honestly, that is the most annoying thing about this game. Nothing happens for a good reason. Lan could have just sat there and twiddled his thumbs and won every tournament by default because everyone else is entirely incapable of having their shit together. Moving on. And now finally, we're at the end with Blue Moon. This is the last Navi I need to beat. Metal Man is fairly similar to his Battle Network 3 form. He has two gears moving back and forth in the middle lane, and of course, they damage you if they happen to hit you. He has his missile attack, which is easy to avoid, and his boomerang blade, which is harder to avoid solely because of the placement of the gear. The only new move is that he'll occasionally change the lane the gears are in, but this doesn't actually affect you as bad as you'd think. He does move around pretty fast though, which can make it hard to take advantage of damage opportunities. Stuff like mines and webs and really anything that he can walk into while he's moving around are great for this fight. And straight line chips and swords are good for when he leaves you an opening. Unfortunately, I wasn't so lucky with Red Sun, and I had to go all the way to the third tournament to get my final soul. Thankfully, this guy was my first opponent. For my final match in Red Sun, we got our first and only rematch from Battle Network 2, Thunderman, and this guy is way more difficult than he was last time. The main threat is this cloud that circles the battlefield. This cloud moves fast and shoots thunderballs at you. These can stun lock you in such a way that it's possible for Thunderman to completely drain your HP before the stun wears off. So obviously, this fight is about managing the cloud. The best advice is to not overreact and be patient. There is enough time to avoid the Thunderball after it's launched, even if it feels like there isn't. Once you've got that down, keep Thunderman in your peripheral and watch for when he gives you an opening. Thunderman himself won't be too hard to manage. His attacks are easy to predict, however the timing and placement of his attacks can make managing the cloud a bit harder. Just stay patient and don't get caught off guard, load up your folder with as many wood element chips as you have, and you should be good for this fight. And so that's it. That's MegaMan Battle Network 4. 6 combined playthroughs, over 40 hours of gameplay between the two games, and that's with me rushing through Red Sun. I am finally done with Battle Network 4. Actually, no. There's still a score left to settle. If you go to Undernet 4, talk to Django and do his quest, Shademan Omega will become a random spawn in the Undernet 4 area, and this time, you get to fight him for real. Shademan is definitely not easy, but once you understand how to control him, he's not the hardest either. When you deal enough damage to Shademan, he'll split into 4 bats and you have to figure out which bat he is to actually damage him. This is an obvious RNG factor to it, but if you've been stocking up on the AoE chips, it makes it a lot easier to efficiently deal damage. So all you have to do is get into a rhythm of hitting him hard enough to make him do the bat thing. This can be easily done with a charged buster shot, and you can control him. His other attacks are easy to manage as well. The bats he'll send at you are easy to destroy, and the hand that comes out of the hole doesn't do much damage. The only real threat is the Sonic Wave, which will either stun or confuse you. I should also mention that the Gun Soul chips, those damage him without him splitting into bats, as well as the Dark chips, those will also damage him without him turning into the bats. So overall, this isn't a terribly hard fight, but at least I got to beat his ass for real. And now, I'm finally done with Battle Network 4. Oh my god, I forgot how bad this game was. The story is poorly written and full of holes, the side stories are contrived and almost entirely pointless, the soul unison mechanic isn't implemented in a good enough way that makes building your folder around them worthwhile, as only a few of the souls are actually worth it. The repetitiveness is mind-numbingly boring, and honestly, the second playthrough is simply not worth it. But it's done, and now I can move on to a good, or at least not terrible, Battle Network game. So, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed watching it more than I enjoyed making it. If you feel inclined to do the algorithm engaging things like commenting, subscribing, and the such, that'd be great. And hopefully, I'll see you in my next video.